And welcome to the Athletic NBA Daily for July 31st, 2025. Baraheni and I, Zena, Keita, are here with Scott Agnes of Fieldhouse Files to talk everything Indiana Pacers. But before we get into that, we have a job to do, which is asking you to do a job, which is help us learn more about what we can do for you. So listeners, we want to hear from you. Check out the link in the description to give us your feedback on the show, what content you enjoyed the most, and what you would like for us to do differently next season. So thank you for your continued support, and thanks in advance for the job. All right, before we dive into everything that's happened, I'm sure all of our listeners are like, remind me of the whiplash that we felt. Remind me of all of the heartbreak that we might have felt as Indiana Pacers fans or folks that watched it around. Like, tell me, catch us up on everything that's happened with the Indiana Pacers.
Yeah, well, first of all, to Pacers fans listening, I apologize for reminding you of what's happened over the last couple of months. Yeah. Obviously, a miraculous and incredible all-time level finals run that was kind of off the back of multiple comebacks, incredible moments from Tyrese, Haliburton, and Pascal Siakam. The group was just entertaining to watch, but what a gut-wrenching way for it to end. And that was Tyrese Haliburton's injury in Game 7 of the NBA Finals. An Achilles tear, which basically all but cemented him to miss next season. And in the offseason, they had some interesting questions as well. After losing in the NBA Finals, Myles Turner, in a shocking turn of events, which we've covered on this podcast, dips. He heads to the Milwaukee Bucks as an unrestricted free agent. The Dame wave and stretch was one of the most wild things that happened this offseason. They re-signed Isaiah Jackson. They traded for Jay Huff. They've Johnny Furphy dunked on Matas Buzelis in the Summer League, which was incredible. There's a lot of things going on in Pacers land. It's been a busy offseason, but a roller coaster nonetheless.
Yeah. The fact that the Pacers came within a single win of their first NBA championship, and just as the confetti was falling, heartbreak arises. I mean, I don't know, Scott, this is where we have to bring you in, because the upcoming season is really going to be a true test for the Pacers. They went from being championship aggressors, and now they're kind of like financially cautious, and, you know, some of the signings that they've made. And I just want to ask you first and foremost, what has the emotional whiplash been like from this finals run, the Haliburton injury, Myles Turner leaving? Like, what has that been like for the Pacers fans?
Yeah, that's such a good way to put it. I've also been saying a roller coaster of emotions, right? Because there's been highs of highs, probably the best Pacers basketball we've seen in a quarter of a century, to being on the cusp of it, leading at halftime of the ultimate game of Game 7, and then it's the double whammy, right? It's not only is Tyrese out for the rest of the game, but it directly impacts the entirety of this upcoming season as well. That's what makes it hurt even more badly, I think, for fans here locally. And so I think a lot of the reaction, quite frankly, has been, here we go again, because the feeling over the last decade plus, not just with the Pacers, but with other sports teams as well, has been an injury to the main player. You could go with Danny Granger. You had Paul George's incident, Victor Oladipo's ruptured quad tendon, an injury you just don't see very often. Domantas Sabonis didn't play in the bubble. And Jeremy Lamb's weird injury up in Toronto where it required surgery. And then obviously you have this significant injury to Tyrese. But to make it even weirder is the fact that last season there were 0 Achilles tendon tears. This season, I believe it was 7, and 3 of them were on the Pacers in Game 1, 2 weeks into the season, and in the final game of the season. So you could really define this Pacer season by not just the highest of highs that they have experienced in quite some time, but also how the ruptured quad tendon, the same injury that were then repaired by the same doctor for all 3 injuries, directly impacted so much. And then we can top that off, obviously, here on the women's side with now Caitlin Clark out. We were on the precipice here in May and June of enjoying Tyrese and Caitlin leading their teams, and now neither one is playing for the foreseeable future due to injuries.
God, I just wanted to mention, like, the what ifs for Pacers world. Yeah. With the injuries, but also thinking back to other moments that they were contenders. Obviously, the Reggie Miller years, you think of the Malice in the Palace and how that changed the 2004 group. Like, there are so many moments where you were just on the precipice of being truly great. And honestly, I just want to say this to make it clear, like, regardless of the Pacers winning last year, they are going to be one of the most remembered playoff teams ever, just because of how not improbable, but incredible that run was. How do you think Pacers fans are like contextualizing that aspect? The fact that, you don't win, but you still end up with this all-time level team and all-time level run.
Yeah, I think what was so special about it, guys, was the fact that so many of those guys had been counted out, had been traded away, had not been wanted by their previous team. Tyrese wanted to be a full-time guy in Sacramento. Obi Toppin is from New York, was drafted by his hometown team, and was sent away for a couple of second-round picks. So they come here. They all got contract extensions. They all were playing their best basketball of their career. And then, to her point earlier, the negative side of this is then you had a guy want out of the most likable team, of a group that had defeated all those expectations, who had created something special here, both culturally, of buy-in, all the buzzwords that you hear front office people talk about. And then Myles Turner did not like the offer the Pacers provided him. No one can blame him for chasing the money. But that said, I think it was very odd, the fact here, as of we are recording this at the end of July, I have not still seen a post on Instagram, on Twitter, saying anything. Hey, shout out to Myles. You're a real one. We love you. Thank you, Myles. Go get your bag.
Wow.
We get it.
Yeah.
The only thing we have
point.
seen, to my knowledge, is the next day, I think Benedict Mathurin posted a photo of him dunking on Myles. That was at the players only mini camp at Pascal Siakam's home down in Orlando. That is it. And that is very odd for a guy who's been the longest tenured Pacer, who has had a fan section at Pacers games, bought on his own money since his second season. This was a marriage that was very happy until the very end. And now it's really difficult to make sense of it as everybody parted ways. And there was just an abrupt ending, even going to the fact, guys, that at his introductory press conference, that was more than a half an hour in Las Vegas with the Bucks, he didn't mention Pacers, the name, once. I was waiting for the obvious slip up after you've been in the same home forever, right?
Yeah,
hey, I look forward to this Pacers. The Bucks team. Like, there was none of that. So that part of the last few weeks has been very odd in Pacers world. But yeah, as to your point, man, this was a group that it was easy to get behind, and a team that was only slated for national TV games 9 times this past season. I think that increased visibility in the postseason, then opened up way more eyes across the nation, that if you didn't have a rooting interest, how could you not get behind this Indiana team?
Well, now I wonder if it opened up eyeballs into, was this a happy marriage? Because with everything that you're saying, that seems as if there was enough evidence there that he would have had a level, Myles Turner would have had a certain level of dependence, and not only dependence, but loyalty, on the Pacers. And it would have been reversed in the sense that the Pacers would have had a certain sense of loyalty to him. And now it makes you feel like, okay, maybe it wasn't as happy. Maybe it wasn't as a level of camaraderie of let's get it together because we were all kind of shunned or we were all kind of underestimated as a team. And we're trying to come together and prove that we deserve to be here. I'm actually wondering, based on everything that you're mentioning, him not saying the Pacers once, I mean, bravo media training, but wondering, is there an aspect of, is it just the money? Like, would this have happened had Haliburton not gotten hurt?
That's the great what if, and I say no chance. There's no way he's leaving, and there's no way in my mind that the Pacers wouldn't have offered up whatever it took to keep this, to run it back, right? And this goes back to maybe the first questions at the very beginning of how that injury changed everything. Given the landscape of the current East, if the Pacers were healthy, or even if Tyrese had suffered a further calf strain, but nothing significant, had all summer to rehab, how are the Pacers not the favorites in the Eastern Conference? So I believe the Pacers were prepared to do whatever it took to run it back. But now, I don't know if I want to call it a gap year, but now it's kind of a figure it out year. It'll be helpful, I think, with some younger players in what they're getting accomplished and what they're headed towards in terms of a Benedict Mathurin and what they're looking at there. But in this current situation, I think for sure they would have just run it back going into next season if they were healthy.
So speaking of next season, because I think it's really fascinating. The Pacers are one of the most interesting teams heading into next year, just because of the fact that, baked in, no Tyrese Haliburton. Obviously, we just talked about Myles Turner gone. So the talent level isn't what it was of a finals team. But also the Eastern Conference is sort of wide open in the sense that there are a lot of teams maybe taking gap years. Shout out to the Boston Celtics. We'll see what happens with the Philadelphia 76ers and the injuries to Joel Embiid and Paul George. But there's an opening there. What is the expectation for this Pacers team? Are you expecting them to compete for a playoff spot again? Are they going to be in the middle of the Eastern Conference, or are they near the bottom?
Yeah, I picture the Pacers probably in that mid-tier, probably 6, 7, 8 range right now. The interesting thing is all the vibes coming out of them in terms of the center spot. And this is what complicates all the things we were just talking about as well, is there was no obvious transition because of the other Achilles. The other guys were to their other centers. Isaiah Jackson, James Wiseman, both suffering that injury. And I think if they were healthy, we would feel very different as well about Myles moving on and going elsewhere in this Pacers current state. Because while both seem to be okay and seem that they will be good for training camp coming in September, we also know usually it takes more than a year to feel like yourself again, and usually at least a year to get back to doing what you did on the court. And so that won't be until November for both of those guys. So that cloudies that center position for me about, and based on that look at your point guard and your center, those are two instrumental positions to what you're doing here. I have no doubt about what Andrew Nembhard can do at the point guard, but who rises up and replaces his role at that 2 guard spot? We expect it to be Mathurin, but that is TBD here. And Jay Huff they acquired, but he was a guy that didn't have a significant role in Memphis. They feel confident, though, about that they can just fill it in by committee rather than just one guy having plentiful of minutes. So they're leaning on the analytics side, saying, hey, per 48 minutes, this is what these guys can deliver. So with that said, I think I picture the Pacers in that mid-tier, probably fighting for one of the last true playoff spots, if not the play-in as well.
Okay, well, right after this break, we're going to talk about who's got to step up in this quote-unquote gap year and how they're going to do that to get them into the playoffs. All right, so Scott, I like this aspect of the gap year. I think that, people don't want to say that because it indicates that you're not trying in that time period, or that you've not put yourself in the best position to succeed. But I think it's true. You can't deny the fact that you aren't as equipped. You aren't as tooled as you were this past season. But the good news is for the Pacers is that they do have some solid pieces still at their disposal that will be leading this team in terms of someone who has the ball in their hands a lot of the time. And that particularly I'm looking at Andrew Nembhard. He now is going to be the point guard of this team, which we've seen him play point alongside Tyrese Haliburton. We saw in the playoffs trying to get Tyrese off the ball, moving off the ball, coming into shots more. And we were like, hey, this looks good. This is actually a nice little setup here with Andrew Nembhard being able to set the table a lot more. And we know that he is one of the best two-way players in this league. I mean, that was probably one of the biggest things that everyone talked about for his game. How can he grow from what he did last year? And now that he is going to be the main table setter and scoring focal point for opposing defenses, what can we look forward to with the evolution of his game?
Yeah, so coming in a couple of years ago, so he was a point guard by nature. Then he comes into the Pacers and was going to play the backup point guard minutes. He was just too good. They needed more minutes for him. Then they needed to make him a starter. That's why he slid into that 2 guard spot. They had a hole there, and he had been too productive, too efficient, that they have found a different role for him. So I don't think it'll be a difficult transition. The only question maybe is how does he handle being the primary ball handler for the majority of his minutes out there? Because as you perfectly alluded to, he did plenty of it, and even more so come the playoff time, given Tyrese, his workload, and those several injuries that led up to the Achilles tear. So no issues about that. I think it's more interesting than what becomes of his previous position, because there is a gaping hole there in that 2 guard spot. With Andrew, I'm not worried about I guess maybe, if anything, the thing you might want to be worried about is how does it affect his defense? Because with more being asked of him on the offensive end, his usage rate's obviously going to go up. How does that directly impact him being their primary defensive stopper out there? Nesmith obviously is the secondary one as well. And that's an area where up until the final few months of the season, they were not a good team. And that, because of their upgrades there and the buy-in and the togetherness of them buying in to the defensive end, is what got them as far as it did in the postseason. So that's probably the only question mark I have for Andrew and for the team. It's what does that secondary guard spot look like moving forward? It starts with Mathurin, but then there's a whole host of other players who could earn minutes there, from a Ben Shepherd to even Johnny Furphy. Maybe he's ready for a little bit of rotational minutes. And the same probably goes with Jarris Walker at the 3 and 4 spot, a guy that didn't get as much time last season. He was hurt and didn't get time in the NBA Finals. But I think he's due. To your point about this being an interesting season and making the most of it, I think of Jarris Walker, Benedict Mather, and Johnny Furphy as those three guys have a lot that they could go paint with a masterpiece, and we'll see what they can create and impact in the number of ways this season.
Just want to mention this, but Andrew Nembhard is tied for first in terms of most improved player odds at BetMGM. So obviously they're baking in a lot of usage. They're baking in a lot of opportunity. And I think that's a pretty interesting bet to me, because I just think, most of the times when you see a player take that leap, it is because of an extra bit of opportunity, extra bit of usage. And so Nembhard is clearly there. You mentioned a couple other guys, like lottery picks for this Pacers team. A lot was made about how this team last year made it to the finals without too many high lottery picks kind of leading them that charge. But Jarris Walker, Ben Mathurin, obviously huge parts to what this Pacers team could be next season. What's the expectations for those two guys who, like you said, flashed moments? Ben Mathurin obviously had some really important stretches in the postseason for them. Jarris Walker was important to them defensively for the most part. What's the expectations for both those guys heading into, again, a quote-unquote gap year?
Sure. Yeah, right away for me, I pencil in Mathurin as your starter. One, out of it makes too much sense. And two, hey, look, it's now or never for your lottery pick that's going into the final year of his rookie deal. I would not expect him to get kind of an extension before this season. I think both sides, it's probably better off for them to play it in, because if you're Ben, you're saying, hey, look, I'm probably not getting a max right now. I think in time, with more of a workload, being a regular starter, I can show my worth. I can show that value. And the Pacers can, within restricted free agency, they want to reward a player if they can earn it. They don't want to get it ahead of time, right? And so I don't think it's guaranteed by any means that Mathurin gets to start right away, but it's way too obvious for me, especially being a former number 6 pick. The only question I have regarding him is just the fit within this team. Is sometimes it just doesn't completely feel right. He's very much a bulldog that just wants to put the ball on the floor and go right to the basket. One of the best players, if not the best on this team, quite frankly, of drawing contact and getting to the free throw line. But that's very different from the style of play the Pacers and Tyrese have headed up, where it's run and gun, fast pace. A lot of times they talk about half-second basketball. Get the ball, make a decision one way or the other. Keep the defense on their toes. And Ben doesn't necessarily always do that. So there is a mismatch in compatibility at some time, but maybe they can blend that and make it happen. Now, in terms of Jarris Walker, I think there's a huge opportunity here. Last year, they knew they needed minutes for him. They knew there really wasn't a real opportunity for him at the 4. So about this time last year, they said, hey, prepare to play the 3. We're going to find minutes for you. Adapt your game a little bit. We need you to play the 3 position. And he did with some challenges, mostly defensively. But he came into this league so highly because of his defense, his versatility, his wingspan, all those different things. Sometimes he gambles too much, certainly. I also think that's a trait of any young player. You're wanting to make something happen. You're wanting to stand out in ways maybe you can't otherwise, because you're not the number 1 or top 4 priority guys out on the floor offensively. So for me, this can be a significant year for both of them, but none more than Mathurin. He's in a contract year and is obviously ready for that first big payday. It's
funny, as you mentioned Ben Mathurin starting, my immediate instinct was like, but the way he plays feels like they need him coming off the bench.
Yeah,
like they need him in that second
vibe.
unit, right? Because of how he acts as such as a spark plug. But we'd be remiss to not mention and not ask about, we talk about Andrew Nembhard being the point guard, sure. But the true number one now, Pascal Siakam. Where do you see his game evolving? Because that's something that we know he's capable of in terms of being a star in this game. But I think the number one narrative around him is like, he's a perfect number two anywhere. But now he's going to be forced into this number one role. How does that feel for you, seeing him be put in that position?
Yeah, the interesting thing to me about all that is kind of he's been the quiet number one guy, I would say, for the Pacers. Now, Tyrese dictates everything. He's the guy with the ball in his hands. They're playing an offense that's suited for him, that is built around him. That said, Pascal's been the most consistent guy the last 2 years.
Yeah,
he's been their top scorer the last couple of years. To me, Tyrese is what makes it all happen, but Pascal has been the most productive, consistent player out on the court. So for me, I'm not really looking for anything more from Pascal. I think the thing that has surprised me and everyone around the team most is how this quiet guy has taken on more of a leadership role. He's gotten out of his comfort zone because he's not a natural, loud, rah-rah cheerleader by any means. But he was the voice they were leaning on throughout this finals run. Not only because he had been there, both with a G League championship and an NBA championship, but he's the older guy in the room, and not old by any means at like 33, I think now, 32. But I think his patience, process-oriented type style will be a positive for this team. I wouldn't be surprised if they go down to Orlando for another players-only mini camp. And for him to do that in his first offseason with the team last year, really impressive. But so I don't really know of any way maybe necessarily he'll adapt or evolve his game. I think you just want him to be exactly what he is right now. Maybe you'll run a few more things through him. I wouldn't mind seeing them. I was going to ask,
do they change the system for him then?
I don't know.
As like the true number one.
I will say the challenge about that is all these pieces were brought in to play this one style. Now, Pascal is a guy who can play any style, and we've seen that because he's much more like Ben. He's much more methodical. Let's play in the half court, throw it to me on the block, read, react. Yep. So that's something I wouldn't mind seeing a little bit more of, because I think at times they forget about him. And you'll look in the second half, he has one shot, and it's in the middle of the fourth quarter and then down by 10. So I think that would be an area I would like to see changes, play through him a little bit more. And that's both on him and his teammates. He's got to demand the ball, and they've got to decisively attack through him, because he can attack in different ways than the rest of the team. He can operate in the mid-range and is really good at that knockdown shot. It's just the way in which they want to play is a little bit counter to that.
Yeah, I love, obviously the growth you mentioned as a leader has been really cool to see, just because, I mean, he's posting it on Instagram and like the whole like Instagram movies that he drops to, those are very cool. But to your point about the offensive style, like we've seen him even in Toronto be a number one option for a team that's been middle of the pack, like playoff, decent offense. Like there's a potential there for him to do that again for Indiana. And truthfully, I think the offense complements him a little bit more because there is spacing, there is shooting, there is secondary ball handling. And like, at that point, you have a Pascal Siakam-led offense that maybe gets you into the playoffs. Above that, moving forward and kind of looking into the years after this one, because we've kind of beat around the bush. It is a bit of a gap year for this Pacers team as they await for their intrepid leader in Tyrese Haliburton to come on as well and return, and hopefully he's healthy. What does it look like? Because you kind of mentioned the doing the center by committee thing, looking for some internal development with Ben Mathurin and Jarris Walker. We know how quickly title contending windows can shut on you. How do you look for the next iteration of this championship core? Do you go out and trade for a center once Haliburton gets healthy? They obviously have the flexibility. What does the next version of this team after this year look like, in your opinion? Yeah,
I still think obviously you stay all in with Tyrese. He's just going into year two of his max contract. Pascal's in year two of a max contract. They all got paid at the same time. And one area I give them credit for is I don't think we saw anybody relax or get content or, hey, I'm good. No big deal. I don't think we saw any of that. If anything, it motivated them even more. I do wonder about Pascal in 2 or 3 years, right? When you're 35 and in that final year of the deal, that was the only thing that did concern me when they gave him, I think, a 4-year deal last summer at this time. I wondered all along if like a guy like TJ McConnell, who knows his years in the league are narrowing, would he want to maybe move on and go to a different situation and go be that backup point guard on a true contending team this upcoming season, knowing he probably has just a couple more good years left where he can be that jolt and energizer bunny kind of guy off the bench. But the reality is I think they're all just so happy and content here. But the center spot, I think, number one, you're hoping one of James Wiseman or Isaiah Jackson blossoms at worst into being a true, dependable, reliable backup center. And I think Isaiah Jackson was on the fringe of doing that. James Wiseman, we didn't even see him 5 minutes. So I can't even explain if that was going to work out. I think it would, but we got very little sample size there at training camp, and that's just about it. And then I think I really thought when they had that early second round pick, I thought they might use that and go get their big. You would have a year, because usually these bigs need 3 or 4 years to develop, stay out of foul trouble, take good shots, understand NBA pacing and space as well. I like the Creighton big defensive minded.
Kalkbrenner.
Yeah, exactly. I thought he might have been a perfect fit. I believe he was still available or right around then at that spot at 35, 36 or whatever. But ultimately they chose to go guard. And if anything, I think right now they're content at center for this season and maybe looking to add another guard to add some depth a little bit more with Tyrese being out. But I think absolutely you have to address that center position for the years to come, because right now, I think, yes, you can replace Myles, but there's certain areas where I think throughout the season, fans are going to realize, wow, we had it good from that aspect, or we never had to really worry about it. Sure, Myles had his faults. He was never a great rebounder. But along the same conversation is a lot of what his job was to get the other center out of there, so that while he may not get the rebound, his teammates would be in charge of getting the rebound as long as he kept his guy away from it. So there's a lot of nuance in my mind about Myles' role. The challenge was, I don't think the Pacers were willing to go beyond that $22 million a year. And I think ultimately he was able to get 26, 27 when it comes down to that. But I think you get a center. And then the big thing is that I've been pushing for the last 6-7 years is they need that new prototype two-way guy. Now, and more to that, kind of that 6'8" forward. Although it's very early, to be clear, but maybe a Johnny Furphy could potentially develop into something like that. That's at least what you are hoping. He's a guy that they moved up for in the early second round of last year's NBA draft. He continues to grow. And the interesting thing to me was covering him in Vegas at Summer League. I think the roster, there was like 15 guys. 9 of them were rookies. He's a second-year guy. Yeah. He was the youngest guy still on the roster at barely 20 years old. So I'm like, look, he's probably got another growth spurt in him. His body is going to develop a great deal. He's already probably 6'8". If he could turn into something, maybe even a starting 3 in a couple of years, that would be significant for this Pacers team that's really lacked that Paul George archetype since they moved on from him. And then Bojan Bogdanovic left and went to Utah in free agency.
I just want to mention real quick, this Pacers team, it's a you have to thread a needle here afterwards, but they have young players. They have all of their picks. They have salaries. There is a world in which even though they lost Myles Turner, they can go out and get something bigger and better and maybe even be better for it. Just want to throw it out there. I think there's a world in which they can do that. I think this front office has shown that they can do something like that. We'll see how it goes down. Very interesting year for the Indiana Pacers.
Where this Pacers front office has been at their best is valuing guys differently than other teams, seeing them, how they're not used properly in their mind, and going out and acquiring them. Their drafts have been better lately. We're not good about 10 years ago, but where they have excelled is the trade market. Just think of all of these key Pacers right now. Haliburton acquired, Siakam acquired, Aaron Nesmith acquired, Nembhard. You can argue the same thing. They acquired that pick and used it on him. So, I think the Pacers front office will absolutely be monitoring those type of players that are available. And because they didn't tie themselves up with a Myles Turner contract for 4 years, now there's that empty hole. The challenge is you got nothing for him. That's probably the biggest concern is a player that has been with you all this time, that you drafted, you developed, and you got nothing for him.
Listen, at the end of the day, though, they still have James Johnson. So that is always helpful for your future.
To be determined.
And in short.
We'll see.
That's true. I mean,
we'll see.
That's true. That's
hopefully
true.
He's back. They need it.
Hopefully he's back. They need their enforcer.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Exactly. Scott Agnes, thank you as always for coming in, giving us all the insight around Indiana. We even got a little bit of fever insight as well. Go check him out at Fieldhouse Files. On behalf of Scott S and myself, we're asking you, go do that survey. The link is in the bio. And we're thanking you for listening. Enjoy the rest of your day, guys.